Morning, all. And without wasting too much of a time, I'll straightway introduce to today's speakers. The first one is Dr. Seema Rao. Uh, Seema is a psychiatrist by training, and currently she's Associate Director, Education and Research at Bangalore Hospice Trust Karunashraya. She had special interest in geriatrics and worked at various geriatric palliative care institutes in Mumbai, and also has worked with Tata Memorial Hospital in Mumbai and Manipal Hospital. So she's also APHN Palliative Care Consultant for Lien Collaborative for Palliative Care Singapore. She's honorary tutor at School of Medicine Cardiff, UK. She is a member of Quality and Clinical Advisory Board, Palcare, Mumbai. She is a national faculty, Indian Association of Palliative Care, as well as of Pallium India. In addition to this, she is trained in dignity therapy, meaning centered psychotherapy, and is currently pursuing the interprofessional spiritual care education curriculum program from George Washington Institute for Spirituality and Health. She is a certified master facilitator for EPIC education, uh, and she is a very good teacher. I'm sure you all will love to listen to her. Our second speaker is Dr. Savita Butula. She is Commandant Chief Medical Officer, Composite Hospital, Border Security Force Academy, Tekkanpur, Gwalior. She has done her fellowship in palliative medicine, diploma as well as MSc from Cardiff University, UK. Currently, she is honorary tutor of Cardiff University and honorary secretary of Indian Association of Palliative Care. She has received many awards for her pioneering work in the field of palliative medicine and leadership role. So I uh, over to Seema and Savita. We all look forward to listen to you.
Thank you, Priya. So nice to see a lot of known faces and some new ones. I'm wondering if Seema is going to lead or should I? Seema, what do you say? Who's going to go first?
Savita, you lead it. Yeah,
Fun?
you lead. I said.
Acha, okay.
I'll just be the
So,
co-host.
good evening to everyone. And today we will be doing a little bit of revision about pain since you are all basically everyone is trained. And I don't think there is any absolute fresher here. Somebody has done a little bit of, I looked at the list of people I have and I saw that some people have done a 4 week training and others have done a 6 weeks training. So everyone is trained and we will do a bit of revision and then we will go on to discussion of a few cases, learn some more new things. And okay, so can you see my slides, Seema?
Yes,
Hello.
yes, we can see it, ma'am.
Okay. Thank you. So we will be discussing pain assessment and management. As we are all aware, as Buddha said, so pain is a part of our existence and pain comes with human life. It is there in all phases of life. We are born in others' pain and perish in our own. So today we will be discussing about a bit of the division, the definition, the approach towards assessment, a bit of the WHO analgesic ladder, and understanding difficult pain. Then Dr. Seema will lead us on to case discussions. What we read when we all got trained was that pain is an unpleasant subjective sensory and emotional experience which is associated with actual and potential tissue damage or described in terms of such damage. This definition now 4 decades later it has been changed by the ISP, and it is now an unpleasant sensory and emotional experience associated with or resembling that associated with actual or potential tissue damage. So this says that pain is always a personal experience which is influenced by the biological, psychological and social factors. and that pain and nociception are different phenomena. So if a person says he's hurting, we have to believe he's hurting, because pain cannot always be inferred only by the activity in the sensory neurons. And it is their previous life experiences, their own concept of pain, how their pain perception has been changed and evolved through their life, that affects a person's perception of pain. Whatever they say, whatever the patients report, we have to respect it. And although pain usually serves an adaptive role, it may have an adverse effect on the function and social and psychological well-being of the person. And verbal description is only just one of the several behaviors to express pain. And if a person is not able to communicate pain, it does not mean that a human or a non-human animal is not experiencing pain. We are all aware of this model of physical, spiritual, and psychosocial factors that affect the total pain. And one important thing that we must remember again when we talk of the pathophysiology of chronic pain is that chronic pain is any pain that is there for more than 3 months, and it brings about permanent changes in the nervous system, because pain receptors are different in the sense that, like olfactory receptors and other receptors, they don't adapt over time. In fact, they get more sensitized because of chemical changes that happen in the nervous system. There is sensitization of nociceptors because of the prostaglandins which are released, and there is sensitization of dorsal horn cells in which NMDA receptors are mainly involved. If part of the body is injured or there is a tumor, then the receptors around it, which are called as sleepy receptors, are also they are also recruited, and the adjacent spinal segments are also recruited. There is a change in the the inputs from the brain stem, which are the inhibitory inputs, and all of this results in change in the perception of pain, permanent changes in the nervous system. So what happens is the winding up phenomena. There is constant worsening of pain in intensity as well as severity and extent till this vicious cycle is broken by good pain management. If you go back to third year of MBBS, you will remember the chart that we had in Hutchison's, and we have all been trained to look for the PQRST characteristics of pain with the body chart. It also helps us to understand the dermatomes which are involved, and a little bit about the pain scales. The unidimensional pain scales are what we usually use in practice. With the rupee scale, now I have seen in practice, it is really very helpful. I'm sure all of us have used the rupee scale, and even uneducated people coming from the villages, uneducated women, they find that rupee scale is practically, it is a very helpful scale in understanding the kind of pain the person is having. But for those of us who are in tertiary care centers and who are interested in research, the multidimensional tools, the ones which are listed here, like the brief pain inventory or the McGill pain questionnaire, Wisconsin brief pain questionnaire, ESAS, these are all very helpful for research work and for understanding the other dimensions of pain. I have put here the kind of pain forms that are used in AIMS and on which I have based my own hospital's pain charts when a patient comes and is in need of detailed assessment, especially for the patients who we admit to the indoor. We take the details of the patient, the details of the family. It has a body chart, as you can see. Then the pain scales, when is the pain maximum, when is it minimum, description of the pain, other interventions, symptoms, and this is a follow-up form that we use for patients who are on opioids. Patients coming back to the OPD, if we start them, I thought they were a good resource to have in the PPT, because the PPTs will be with you. And if we want to look at how we follow up the patients, if somebody doesn't have this kind of a chart, we can always base our own charts on this. So this lists the drugs, and it also lists the symptoms that the patient might be having, and follow them up week after week. This I do not think needs any introduction to this group. We are all aware of the analgesic ladder and the drugs inside it. But the only thing is that for those of us who have done our training a long time ago, I just wanted to mention that buprenorphine and methadone have recently become available within India. Adjuvant analgesics, they are mostly the same, but uh, the one important thing to remember is that PPIs are used a lot more than is indicated, and we must be careful in the use of PPIs. PPIs can also lead to a lot of acute. The thing is that Acelloc and ranitidine are good for routine use, and PPIs are to be used when we are using steroids as well as NSAIDs for the patient together. And they are sometimes given for months and months together, and they are expensive drugs, one of the most overused drugs. So just like ondansetron, PPIs have to be, evidence-based use has to be there even within the palliative care patients. A bit about tapentadol. It's a centrally acting analgesic with a dual mode of action. It acts a little bit like tramadol with the potency between tramadol and morphine. The recommended dose is between 50 to 100 mg PO 4 to 6 hourly for adults, and the maximum dose being 600 milligrams a day. I'm not going too much into the details of these tables and all, because these are all things that you all are aware of. So I will only mention things that I think we need to revise a little bit. And opioids, I'm sure we have all been using them, but we will discuss when we come to the case discussions. We will discuss a little bit more about the practical aspects of the use and problems with availability that might be there in your areas. The NDPS Act, I'm sure you all are aware that it was modified in 2014, and it's uniformly applicable in all parts of India, but it is yet to be implemented in many of the states because there's a lack of clarity on the ground, especially with the policymakers and the state drug controllers about how it is to be implemented. And the notified medicines that are known as the essential narcotic drugs are now a part of this act. These are notified medicines which are now identified, and they are listed for the purpose of medical use in recognized medical institutions for the management of moderate to severe pain. So the list of ENDs after the modified act now includes morphine as well as methadone, codeine, hydrocodone, oxycodone, and fentanyl. And tramadol was listed as one of the ENDs in 2018. The opioids which have been launched in India now in the last few years are buprenorphine, but we do not use too much of it for malignant pain because it's not only costly, but it also has a ceiling effect. It is a good opioid to use in case of non-malignant pain like rheumatoid arthritis or very severe osteoarthritis. And methadone, I personally do not have much experience. So I will request after my presentation that if any of you has used it, we will discuss it later. But the thing to remember is that its properties differ from that of other pure agonists, and it can be remarkably potent at small doses. It has a long half-life. It's not expensive, therefore it is a good drug, but it requires a lot of training before we use it. And it can give much better analgesia with reduced side effects. And sometimes difficult elements of pain like neuropathic and incident pain can become easier to control with methadone use. OTFC is another new thing that has come up, oral transmucosal fentanyl citrate. It comes in the form of what is called as a lollipop. It's a drug impregnated raspberry colored lozenge on a plastic handle, and is available in packs of 200, 300 and 400 microgram units. The peak effect comes faster than the oral drugs. So it's about, you rub it inside the cheek, and the peak effect comes in about 22 minutes because of this transmucosal absorption. And this is something which is very helpful in breakthrough pain. We will just discuss breakthrough pain in a while. And this can provide a very good non-invasive method, alternative method for those with a poor oral or venous access. But the only problem is that it's not available everywhere. It is available only in a few tertiary care centers, and it's very expensive. And talking of buprenorphine now, it's good for moderate to severe non-malignant pain. It has a long duration of action, and it's available in IV, SL as well as in transdermal patches. The effect lasts for more than 7 days, starting from the third day, and the adverse effects would include blurred vision, cough, nausea, confusion, shortness of breath, and dizziness. I have also put in a slide with an opioid conversion table. This you can go back again when you look at the PPTs. You can keep this in the table. You can keep it on your tables and use it frequently whenever you need to change the doses of drugs. It's a very helpful table to remember. So, Rajalakshmi, are you there? Are you there in the office? Can we have the little quiz now
Yes,
before we go on to the next part?
yes,
So we are going to give you a little quiz of 5 questions, and we will have it on the poll, Rajalakshmi,
yes,
on
yes.
the Zoom poll. So we will have 5 questions which we are giving out to you, and just go through them, and then we will give you the questions in the end. So, hi, is everyone there? Let's put on the cameras and see you. Hello, Shobha, Dr. Ajit, Binny, Elizabeth, Mary. Oh yes, everyone's there. So shall we go on to this little quiz? Yes?
Yes.
Okay. Right. So next questions, Rajalakshmi, please.
Actually, attendees are doing it right now, ma'am. So can we wait a little more so that they will
Finished, ma'am.
I think yes, not everyone has done it. They are doing it, right? 13 of 48.
Yeah, and as they're doing Savita and Seema, I'm just giving you little time check because it's a huge topic to be covered. So we have already covered about 15 minutes, just to give you the timeline.
Thank you, Priya. Just do keep us in check.
So, Dr. Hari Mohan has written, some of them can't see the quiz. Hari Mohan and Nivedya.
you can't see a poll screen which has questions in it. You can answer it.
This is Dr.
Controlled very well. And these include 70% of patients with advanced cancer, about 65% with advanced non-malignant disease. Out of these, 10% would have pain that is difficult to control. And this can be because of pain which is responding either poorly to opioids, or there is enough analgesia, but episodic breakthroughs are there. That is, sharp pain comes in between a well-controlled pain. And there can be pain which is caused by non-physical factors. So once we have a patient complaining of pain which is not getting well controlled, we need to look at the psychosocial issues, try to manage the maximum dose with whatever side effects we can control well, and reduce the dose of opioids, see if switching to an alternative opioid will help. Try to see if we can change the route of administration, change the adjuvant drugs, and also consider neuropathic pain, which can be sometimes very difficult to control. Another pain which is difficult to difficult to control includes the cancer-induced bone pain, and this is the commonest cause of pain in cancer. Almost 45% patients will have CIBP, and out of the 60% have severe pain. This pain can be there in multiple sites and be present on a background of spontaneous. There is a triad of background pain which is constantly present, along with spontaneous pain which comes on during movement or sometimes at rest also. And the patients can have allodynia, paresthesias, hyperalgesia to temperature, as well as the underlying mechanism which is different in all of these because of underlying permanent changes in the nervous system. As I told you, the winding up phenomena. And this pain can sometimes be very difficult to treat. The radiotherapy remains the gold standard for treating these patients, along with NSAIDs, opioids, gabapentin, pregabalin, and bisphosphonates. and a little bit about neuropathic pain, which is because of injury or dysfunction of the PNS or CNS, and is characterized by spontaneous and evoked pain in areas of sensory abnormality. Patients can have hyposensitivity as well as hypersensitivity, and usually describe this kind of pain as burning, pricking, sharp, cold, squeezing, or electric shock-like pain. And patients can have paresthesias, dysesthesias, allodynia, as well as hyperalgesia. This substantially changes their quality of life, and the treatment of this pain is difficult. So what we need to tell them is that we will try to look after this pain, but be sure to tell them from the beginning that 100% relief might not be possible, so that the patients will have a realistic expectation, and their interventions and treatment might be different from those expected for nociceptive pain. This has become an increasing problem in cancer patients, and even after the cancer has been treated, the neuropathic may persist and affect their quality of life. The chemotherapy induced peripheral polyneuropathy is becoming more common, and numbness in a glove stocking distribution can be there, along with cold and touch allodynia, and this may persist even up to 2 decades after treatment and be severe enough to require opioids. A little bit also about pain in HIV. It is distal sensory polyneuropathy, which is the most common one, occurring in about 33% of patients. And it may begin slowly with distal paresthesias and burning pain in the lower extremities. Patients can often come and tell us that they are not able to wear their shoes or socks. And when they go out in the heat, especially during the summers, there is pain under the soles. They may have hypersensitivity as well as allodynia. And cytomegalovirus, we know that all of these things, cytomegalovirus, hepatitis, post-herpetic neuralgia, the malignancy that occur with HIV, as well as stomatitis and pain because of debility, ulcers, and stomatitis is again common in HIV, and we need to be on the lookout for this kind of uncontrolled pain. In children, especially, procedural pain is an important thing to remember. And as far as possible, unnecessary procedures can be avoided. Patients should be given information. And one thing that we need always to tell our staff, especially those in the lab and the emergency, is that tell the patient's family, explain to them what is going to be done, allow them to be present. Sometimes we see what practically happens is that the child is being held down by two people holding the legs and two people holding the arms while the parents are sent out. The child is screaming at one end, the mother is crying at the other end. So allow the mother or the father to sit on the bed, hold the child, have a comfortable position, and allow the mother to hold the child closely, so that there is no negative restraint. Decrease the number of people inside that room, and encourage the use of topical anesthetics like IMLA, which is very, very helpful both for taking lab samples as well as for spinal tap, and even for ladies who are very sometimes very sensitive to IV procedures. So even in the ward, these are a very big help. The IMLA we must try to make available more often in our hospitals. And anxiolytics and sedation, something as simple as syruphenurvin can be very helpful in getting the children to do these procedures. One thing I personally find very helpful, especially for dental procedures, which is not palliative care patients, but in dental procedures also in our hospital, we have introduced cartoon movies, and the children are happily watching the cartoons while their dental procedures are done. A little bit about the approach. We are aware that it's the 5th vital sign and requires a stepwise evaluation. But important to remember in the emergency is that a patient coming with severe pain, a severe pain is always an emergency, and we need to manage the pain along with the assessment. Especially for the younger staff and the staff who are there may not be very comfortable with the palliative patients. We need to tell them that you continue your evaluation while giving the analgesics to the patient. Don't sit and fill up the pain charts while the patient is having severe pain. So for neuropathic pain, we are all aware of the drugs. The ladder for neuropathic is a little bit different from what we have seen earlier. Here we have steroids at step 1, tricyclic antidepressants or antiepileptics at step 2, and at step 3 there is TCA and antiepileptic. along with NMDA's receptor channel blockers at step 4 and spinal analgesia, that is the interventions at step 5. When a patient comes and there may not be a good response to opioids because some of the pains may be they may not be opioid sensitive. So early addition of an adjuvant analgesics, a TCA or an anticonvulsants early may be helpful. And there is no evidence at present for combining adjuvants. They have to be chosen for individual patients depending on the side effects and the symptom profile. The doses need to be titrated, and sometimes if one adjuvant is not working, we decrease the dose and add the second adjuvant. This is a table which gives out how we decide on what is to be given along with the side effects and the types of interventions. Now, we are all aware of nerve blocks and sympathectomy, RFA, all of these are helpful, but practically what we need to know is where these are available for our patients. So if we are staying in a little place in Uttarakhand, then we need to know whether Haldwani is doing these nerve blocks or the patient has to go to AIIMS to get it done. I'm just giving an example, but it's good to know people in anesthesia or in the tertiary care centers near our own hospitals who can provide these to our patients. This is the revised WHO ladder. I'm sure you are all aware that there's a step 4 proposed for the WHO ladder, which has now got nerve blocks at the top for patients who are not getting control with the normal 3 steps of the ladder. And when we are talking of difficult pain, then the first thing that we need to know is what is breakthrough pain. So breakthrough pain is the severe pain which comes on in a background of well-controlled analgesia, and it can have sharp spikes coming within 1 to 2 minutes, lasting for 3 to 5 minutes, and maybe of moderate to severe intensity. And they have a significant impact on the patient's quality of life because these are very difficult to control. By the time we give a dose of opioid or an IV injection, the pain goes. So the patient may be left with side effects without getting good control of the pain. So the question that we had asked you in the quiz was, what are the kinds of breakthrough pain? The breakthrough pain can be an incident pain which comes after some activity or physical function. It can be voluntary, like moving, going to the toilet, or it can be involuntary, like breathing or coughing. It can be end of dose pain, which comes on when the time period of the opioid or the medication that we are giving is ending. And it can be spontaneous, which can come on for no known reason. So one big reason for this kind of pain is bony metastasis in the spine, pelvis, or femur, and pain is increased on moving in these cases. We generally give opioids along with NSAIDs, and rescue doses of opioids can be given before a dressing or a visit to the toilet, half an hour before we give an extra extra rescue dose of the opioid. And non-drug measures go along with it: RT surgery, AIDS appliances, and bisphosphonates in case of skeletal metastasis can help in short-term analgesia and prevent further skeletal events. The drug of choice in these cases is oral transmucosal fentanyl citrate, but unfortunately it is not available in the rural and peripheral areas yet. As you can see in this diagram, the breakthrough pain sharp spikes are there and they need to be covered with OTFC because the other medication really doesn't help in these. And when we are not able to control pain with optimum use of our step 3 drugs, it is important to exclude psychosocial causes and untreated pain of any other kind which may be there. We must remember that cancer patients may also have polylithiasis, osteoarthritis, debility, and other causes of pain. And we can consider different drugs or different routes. And as I told you, methadone has a special role in case of difficult pain. And invasive techniques are what we can use when all of this does not work. So 10 to 15% of our patients may require invasive techniques, and patients' expectations, the prognosis, pathology, how much trained staff is available, where these methods can be used, where the patient can be sent for these will determine how much we can offer to them. With spinal analgesia becoming more common, there are now different catheters, pump technology. These are becoming more common in the higher centers. And
Savita, how much
yes,
time really?
finishing the train
Sure,
staff
yeah.
and the lines becoming more common. There are different factors that affect our choices. And a little bit about the newer methods is that lidocaine patches are becoming more available. These are very helpful in both HIV as well as in some vertebral metastasis and pain because of herpes. And NMDA receptors as well as CGRP antagonists may become more common in the future, along with physiotherapy and other non-pharmacological techniques being used at the same time. But a little bit of humor given at the right time is always helpful. And this is a slide I have taken from Dr. Sushma, who likes to tell us that humanity is a drug which doesn't have an underdose, which doesn't have an overdose, and is the best treatment available. For all of us, learning how to treat difficult pain is not only an ethical imperative, it is also important for us to manage our patients and to get their blessings when we treat them well. So these are the references. And now I have finished my part. I would request now the second part of the call, can we go on? And then Dr. Seema to discuss the cases. Thank you.
Almost everybody finished?
The poll disappeared before I could complete.
Oh, okay.
I completed, I couldn't submit it.
So, most of them have completed. Raj Lakshmi, maybe? You can tell us?
I think 30 people have completed, but
Uh-huh.
some have closed in between. That is why we couldn't complete it fully. We don't have an option of relaunching it again.
Okay. So, Seema, would you like to start by discussing these questions or going through the questions asked in the participants has asked in the chat box? How would you like to go about it? Seema? Hello? Hello?
I think we have lost Dr. Seema in between.
Okay. So, is she around? Okay, so should we take the case discussion first or should we do the chat box questions first, Raj Lakshmi or Sunil?
I think we can go with the case presentation, quickly discuss the cases, and then we'll move on to the chat altogether.
Okay, so cases will be done by Betty George, right?
I think Dr. Seema have prepared a few questions.
Okay,
So we can go for it first, then clear the discussion, clear the doubts after the discussion, and then we'll move on to the case presentation by Dr. Betty.
oh, okay. So Seema is back. Hello, Savita, would you want to continue till then?
Okay. So I'll read
Yeah.
out the case till then.
Yeah.
And if Shobha Nair is here and you are here, then we can, request you to carry on till Seema comes back. We
Yeah,
can all
we'll
give in
manage.
our
Yeah.
input. Yeah, we will.
Yeah.
So I'm reading out the first case for everyone. Mr. AN has carcinoma lung and presents with insomnia due to pain in the right side of the chest. He has been given tablet diazepam 10 milligram HS, tablet diclofenac 50 mg TID, injection pentazocin 1 ampule, and injection Phenergan 25 mg IM SOS. Tablet Brufen 400 milligram 6 hourly. So suggest modifications to make the prescription more rational. He also has pain every time he goes to the bathroom or coughs. What do you think is the cause? What will you advise? So Dr. Priya, Dr. Seema, and
I
Dr.
think Seema is back. Yeah. Seema, over to you. Yeah.
I got logged out. Yeah. So, yes, Savita, continue.
Oh, we were just asking people for the input, Seema. I read out the case to them.
Okay.
So since I cannot see the whole of the people who are there, Priya, can you help me lead on the discussion till Seema is ready? So I would request the people to give their input on how we can make this prescription more
So,
rational.
so basically, what kind of a pain we are looking at?
You can put up your answers in the chat, I guess. We'll monitor it. Okay. What type of pain is he having? That
He gets it on coughing. Is it pleuritic chest pain or is it bone pain?
Yeah. Somebody has written incident pain. Some two people have written neuropathic pain. Yes, right. Incidental breakthrough pain. Hmm. And Nilima has said start on tablet morphine. So what do you think about injection pentazocin and Phenergan SOS?
okay?
Yeah,
Cannot.
Dr. Harimohan says pentazocin is mixed agonist, cannot be used. Pain could be from ribs as he has. And Bharat Paliwal has said add morphine also for incidental pain. Right. So Priya, your comments, please.
Yeah. So, Seema, are you leading or?
Yeah, you can give your comment.
Yeah, so I think basically we have to start with understanding the type of pain. Once we know the type of pain, then what are the medications which are acting there and how much is the pain score? Like, when we start this combination, what was the pain score and does it have any reduction in the pain score? I think here we need to ask these more questions to be more specific. And as participants said, I think pentazocin and Phenergan I would not give. Uh, the next step would be to really find out where the pain is coming from. Is there a role for giving morphine? And then titrate, explain, and then adjust. Yeah, Seema.
Am I audible?
Yes, yes.
Yes.
Yeah. So I'm sorry because my connection is very patchy, so I'm not able to hear everything completely. But as some of the suggestions that are coming from the chat boxes, Y2 NSAIDs. I mean, absolutely correct. There is no need to put two non-steroidal anti-inflammatory drugs. See, primarily when we manage pain, it is very important to first understand what is the type of pain. What is the type, what is the character of that pain, whether it is only nociceptive, whether it is neuropathic, whether it is a bone pain, what is causing the pain, correlate with the anatomical finding or whatever you can find for the pathology, correlate with the pathology, find the intensity of the pain. That will decide on the type of pain will help you decide what drug to use. Intensity will tell you how much up the ladder or down the ladder you should go. And the presence or absence of breakthrough or incident pain will let you adjust the dosing. So I think understanding this is extremely important. And as Savita said, PQRST. Along with that, also it is extremely important to more understanding the what the patient thinks is causing the pain, and what how much of value to this pain is there, that you and we are also extremely important. Am I audible?
Yes, 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 you're audible.
Yeah, voice is feeble karke. Yeah, so as you said, agreed that it all depends upon what drug you will start, will depend upon the scoring, probably on the pain score. What is the intensity? Was it moderate? Was it severe? Okay, and what do you think
Yeah.
about tablet diazepam? Pardon, somebody wanted to say anything? Yes,
No, no.
correlate with the image findings. Yes, agreed. No diazepam. Okay, why? He has insomnia.
So we can give diazepam for insomnia, but yes, we need to first of all go about it in a more rational way, as Dr. Seema said. So first of all, assess the pain, use a pain tool, use the multidimensional pain tool if required, see what associated symptoms are there, see whether it is a bony metastatic pain or there is a neuropathic component. Go to step 1 of the ladder, start with paracetamol, and you may want to add brufen or diclofenac to it. No need to go with diclofen and brufen both. Then pentazocine, we generally do not use. It also has a ceiling effect. It causes a lot of sweating, not recommended for chronic pain. And may want to use a step 2 or a step 3 drug, step 3 of the ladder, depending on the pain. Generally, if the patient is well, we can go for CT. Not so well, go for a chest X-ray, and then see how the patient responds. Look out for the other causes of pain. Add PPI if required. If required, not all patients require PPIs. As I said, PPIs are the most overprescribed medicines. So I think that's it for this prescription. Then we go on to the next one.
Can I give my suggestion, please?
Yes, please,
Yeah.
please go.
Yeah, see, what are the imaging findings? That's most important. We need to know if there's a rib fracture. If there is a bone mass, you can have radiation. Local radiation can be given. Bisphosphonate should be started. Steroid should be started. The clinical findings which are told us talking anything about whether X-ray was done, CT scan was done. It's very important to know about the pain. What is the pathology of the pain? Is it coming from the lung beneath? Is it from the bone?
Yeah.
And if it is in the bone, is there a fracture there? What are we going to do about it?
Very
Absolutely
true. Very true. You're
correct.
right.
Absolutely
Absolutely.
correct. So that is what finding what is correlating with the image findings is extremely important, because disease management is also part of control of the pain. So
No, we can do a simple X-ray. It will give us a lot of information.
yes.
Yes.
Yeah, and the another thing would be, Seema, we also need to find out, since it is a CA lung case, whether there is already a breathlessness, and whether the patient is taking morphine for the breathlessness. Do we need to titrate the dose, and all those things need to be considered as well, I guess.
Very true. Right. So, Seema, will you take the second one?
What about the 2 anti-inflammatory drugs which were given? 2 anti-inflammatory drugs are given.
Yeah, we said
Not to
that
be
is not the right
given together.
practice. That we discussed, that is not the right practice. You need to give either one anti-inflammatory drug would be enough.
Yes, but paracetamol can be combined with them if you need. Can be combined with either brufen or paracetamol in a dose of up to 1 gram 6 hourly. So, Seema requested to take the second case now, please.
Yeah. So this is Mrs. Sharada, 25 years, has CA buccal mucosa and burning shooting pain on the right side of the face.
Priya, has she lost connection again?
I guess she had.
Okay, I can see her there. So I
Real.
think we can read the case till then. The following prescription has given her no relief: tablet morphine 5 milligram TDS and diclofenac 50 milligram BD. She has history of chewing tobacco for 8 years. She has two young daughters. Her husband is a laborer on daily wages. What is wrong with this prescription? And how will you modify it? What will you plan for them? Any suggestions from the group, really? Again, start thinking from the same way, like what type of pain is this?
Shooting pain, is there a neuropathic component?
Yes. Hmm.
I think Seema has a bad connection today. So is morphine 5 milligram TDS enough dose? If
No, ma'am.
suppose after our assessment and deciding that morphine helps in relieving the pain, is it uh, TDS is a good enough dose? What everyone thinks? Hello. So someone is saying every fourth hour. Is everyone agreeing to that? So what would be what's wrong with the prescription? Any comments? Somebody is saying diclofenac TDS.
Yeah, I feel routine pain shows that there is some neuropathic element along with the nociceptive.
Your voice is
Definitely, we
breaking,
need
sir.
to add. Sorry,
Your voice is breaking, sir.
I think the
Can I speak?
Yeah, sure, sure.
Morphine can be given in fourth hour along with laxative. And instead of diclofenac, we can use amitriptyline also, antidepressants.
Okay. So you want to give
But
along with diclofenac or in addition to diclofenac and morphine?
then the laxative should be given, and along with the if you are giving diclofenac, it should be BD dose may not be adequate, and it should be supplemented with omeprazole or pantoprazole for H2 receptors. Yes.
Okay. Thank you very much, sir, for answering this. Any other comments? Somebody else wants to do it differently? Are there any thoughts that morphine is needed or not needed?
So
There are
somebody,
many comments, and
somebody
it's
has written, one is the comment about total pain. Am I audible now?
yes, yes,
Huh? Okay.
yes.
Somebody has written about total pain being there and some burning and shooting characteristics of neuropathy.
We can't hear you.
Little louder, Sim.
Okay, I'll type what I have to say. I think there's a problem with
No,
the.
ma'am. Now it's better.
Now it's
Better.
better. Yeah, yeah.
Okay, okay. So they have said that burning and shooting is characteristic of a neuropathic pain. So in addition to adjusting the dosage of the morphine, is there anything else that we would do here?
You can add an adjuvant.
What would you add?
Amitriptyline or gabapentin.
Yeah, so there is a component of both nociceptive neuropathic as well as given her your 25-year-old CA buccal mucosa, two young daughters. There is a component of the psychosocial aspects also, here. So probably looking at it from all fronts, in addition to adjusting the dosage of the morphine, adding on an step one, step Yeah, step 1 and step 3 drugs along with neuropathic pain medications. At the same time, neuropathy could be anything, like you could give gabapentin, pregabalin, whatever you wanted to choose. And along with that, probably focusing on the psychosocial aspects would be, in terms of holistic care for this patient. Priya, you want to come in? Anything else?
Yes, I think per se, like when we are saying what's wrong with this prescription, I think we need to take the entire history correctly. Again, focusing more on what else are her problems and little bit more about, as Seema was saying, like little bit more about her family history, whether there is a history of somebody having cancer in the family and the impact of that and how is she reacting to that pain. All these things are important, and as Savita was mentioning in her presentation, unless we spend good time taking the history and realizing what kind of medication combination is going to help her, it would be not satisfactory that we just write down these medications and leave it to them to manage it themselves. The other thing would be, I think, in NSAID also, people will have to decide which medication to do as a first choice depending on their personal choice, because some people would prefer diclofenac, others would give ibuprofen, which includes paracetamol and brufen. So two medicines in one drug, so multiple medications can be avoided. Yeah, and then we need to review it again with whatever prescription we are giving. And
Thank
as Seema said, we can add gabapentin or amitriptyline in a graded manner, not at one go,
Yeah.
maybe. Yeah.
Steroid can also be given for neuropathic pain if it is not relieved, to relieve the edema on the nerve. But mostly, yes, what you said. And somebody mentioned controlled release morphine. I would only like to add that we titrate the pain with normal relief morphine, and then first find out the dose which is relieving the pain in 24 hours, and then convert it to CR. Don't go on to CR straight away. So, do we have time for another discussion, or should we take the questions now? Priya?
I
Ma'am,
think
can I ask a doubt?
yeah, I think we have about
Ah,
5 minutes to continue the discussion on this before we go to case presentation. Yeah, somebody was
ma'am.
asking. Yeah.
Yeah. Ah, I'm Nancy. In this discussion, it came that amitriptyline can be given for neuropathic pain. But in this case, patient is on RT. There will be salivary volume will be reduced. When we give amitriptyline, it has some anticholinergic effect. So it will reduce the salivary volume. It will cause dryness and all. So is it good to give amitriptyline?
Very good question. Very good question, actually, and
Hello.
answered it also. Am I audible?
Yes, yes, yes. Yeah.
Dr.
Yes,
Seema,
so very relevant.
Dr. Seema, you are muted now.
Sorry. Okay. So as I was saying
It's
that
breaking, ma'am.
okay, I'll type my answer.
Yeah, so what
You're
Seema was
audible.
saying is that she has asked
Maybe.
the question and she has answered it also. It's a very relevant point. Again,
So,
the treatment has to be individualized, no?
Seema,
So,
maybe you can put down your video so that people can hear you better.
Is it okay now?
yeah.
Yeah, so actually that's what one of the things about in the WHO ladder is you look at the contextual factors also. You look at it gives you a wide framework, but it has to be individualized to the patient's needs and the context of the patient. So when we look at what you said is ANSI, right, who brought it, you asked the question and you gave the answer also. So when I spoke about neuropathic pain, I said gabapentin or pregabalin. It's precisely that when
Yes.
patients are on RT, it is better to not to give anything that causes more dryness of the mouth. So I think gabapentin or pregabalin would be a better choice at this point here. Um, Absolutely correct. You are right. That is a question. How much morphine was given as breakthrough? Okay, that is how would you decide how much of morphine to be given as breakthrough? Do you decide it randomly, or is there a process by which, or a calculation that you do and you give? Hello? Can you hear me?
Yes, doctor, we can.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah,
Yeah.
usually the present NCCN guideline says it
Mhm.
was earlier 3 times, 3 breakthroughs. Now it is 4 breakthroughs.
Correct.
Usually we give 25% of the total dose.
Correct.
So in this case, it is 5 milligrams. So maybe you can give around 2.5 milligrams or so, more than 3 to 4 times, then you have to increase the dose. Now we are just giving morphine TDS. That is again wrong. We have to give 4th hourly. And then the breakthrough has to be calculated if the pain is not coming down if we're giving 4th hourly.
Yeah.
TDS is absolutely wrong. And we have to add gabapentin or pregabalin because there is a neuropathic element. There's a lot of mucositis. So probably lidocaine patch can also be given. If xylocaine swallow can be given because there will be a lot of mucositis during radiotherapy. So the pain is not handled clearly before we go into the psychosocial elements. Let's handle the pain first and then go into, naturally she will have psychosocial element because we are not controlling her pain. So how is she not going to have it? She will be having it.
Okay, so I think just to clarify, first we have to see the 24-hourly dose requirement of morphine. Okay, and then because we give it 4th hourly, so 1/6 of that 24-hour dose is the dose we generally give for breakthrough pain. I think everybody is clear. Seema, would you want to add something? And then if such breakthrough doses are more than 3, then we have to calculate the overall 24-hour dose and increase it accordingly. Do you want to add, Seema or Savita, anything to this?
I think absolutely. As you said, it is about the total dose, 1/6 of the dose that you give as breakthrough. And okay, it's 4 now. What is that?
Dr. Hari Mohan is saying that 4 doses of breakthrough. NCCN says 4 doses.
Then we can go on to higher dose. That is what he means probably.
Yeah.
So I think, Seema, should we stop the discussion here and then go to case presentation because it is already 8 o'clock here. Is that all right?
Yeah, fine.
Okay, so let's go to case presentation today. It is going to be presented by Dr. Betty George. She's working in medical oncology and clinical research at Lakeshore Hospital and Research Center, Kochi, since 2005. She has done her BCCPM and NFPM from Ernakulam and Calicut respectively, and she's working in palliative care at Lakeshore Hospital since 2017. So Dr. Betty George, please.
Good evening, everyone. So we, Dr. Hari Mohan and myself from Lakeshore Hospital, today we are presenting a case of concurrent oncology and palliative treatment for a cancer patient. We have a 12-year-old girl who is the eldest of the 2 siblings. She is diagnosed with primitive neuroendocrine tumor, PNET, of left parotid and parapharyngeal area. She came to us on 20th of March 2018, and that happened to be her 9th birthday as well. She was complaining of a swelling of left cheek of 1 month duration, and an MRI confirmed an extensive lesion in the left upper neck, extending into almost all the structures nearby, like encasing the carotid artery and internal jugular vein, infiltrating the ramus of the mandible, etc. And PET-CT confirmed the involvement of cervical nodes, but no distant metastasis. And histopathology with IHC proved it to be a PNET. Next slide, please. So the lesion was inoperable. So she was started on chemotherapy with VAC-IE regimen. With 6 cycles, she showed marked reduction in size. So she was taken for radical radiotherapy, followed by 10 more cycles of chemotherapy. The disease showed marked reduction and she was stable, but the lesion was still inoperable. But in 4 to 5 months, by October 2019, there was disease progression and she started to have pain. Initially, it was controlled by NSAIDs. By November, we had to introduce morphine, and by December, she was changed on to fentanyl patch at 37.5 micrograms. We also gave her palliative RT to control pain, and she was started on immunotherapy with nivolumab. For some time, she had control of pain, and we could slightly reduce the dosage of fentanyl. But again, pain increased, and we had to add on the anticonvulsants and increase opioids to about 87.5 micrograms. So the disease was stable for about 1 year. By November 2020, she was again having disease progression, and she had uncontrollable pain. So the fentanyl again had to be increased up to 112 micrograms along with palliative RT for pain. And now she's on again second-line palliative chemotherapy with carboplatin gemcitabine, and she has completed 3rd cycle day before yesterday. So the presenting complaint is pain over the left cheek and ear, both nociceptive and neuropathic. The intensity is usually between 0 to 3, but intermittently she gets severe pain, about 8 to 10 score, and she may require parenteral administration of opioids. She has different types of pain characters at different times, like throbbing. Sometimes she says it's like hitting with a hammer, sometimes knowing, sometimes burning, etc. She may get radiation to neck, to the eye, or to the lower jaw. It's usually precipitated by and increased by chewing. She has got difficulty in opening the mouth and hence restricted food intake. There is numbness of left lower jaw. There is disfigurement due to edema, and there is disturbed sleep occasionally. On examination, she is low for for age. The body weight is only 29 kg. There is swelling of whole of left side of face. There is tenderness over left cheek. There is trismus. Oral cavity is normal, well maintained, and systems are within normal limits. Psychosocial aspects, both the child and the parents are having psychosocial issues. For child, she says she gets intermittent episodes of fear, but she cannot pinpoint what she's fearing about. She says just like she'll get some episodes of fear. She's very much concerned about disfigurement. She's actually very keen about her dressing and her appearance. So she's very concerned with the edema and the disfigurement. And she seems to be slightly depressed now, because earlier she was with the expectation to go back to school and all, but now with prolonged treatment, she has understood the situation, and she's slightly, activities are slightly reduced. Mata, she is a highly spiritual person, and she's having a, putting up a brave face, but she has a difficulty to take care of the child alone, and she has to look after the younger sibling also. And father, he is working abroad, especially to arrange the financial support, because only then she will get the insurance to take care of the treatment expenses. And he desperately wants to be with the family. And the later development is that yesterday they brought a CT scan of the father. He was having some bleeding from the jaw and some lesion there, and they had done a CT scan. And it is showing a small lesion exactly at the same position as the child has. This was done just yesterday. So the whole family is under a very stressed condition. The medications she's on is the palliative chemotherapy, plus fentanyl transdermal patch of 112 micrograms, syrup paracetamol 250 milligram 3 times daily, gabapentin 300 mg, Gerbisa. And in between, she will get inflammations or infections. So that will be managed with intermittent short courses of steroids, chimeral fort antibiotics, or antifungals as required. The main concern is the pain management. then how to help her cope with the disfigurement and the impairment of functions that is expected in a due course, and the psychological support that we have to give to the family and the child. So in summary, we have a 12-year-old girl with PNET of left cheek, post-radical chemo-RT, immunotherapy, 2 courses of palliative RT, and now on palliative chemotherapy, with complaints of severe nociceptive and neuropathic pain of left cheek, on high-dose opioids, NSAID, steroids, anticonvulsants, and is prone for further disease progression. The discussion points we mainly would like to have is, one, she's on very high dose of morphine at 112 micrograms for a 12-year-old girl. And second thing, what we can do for the pain management, whether we can change it to methadone. We are not having access to methadone now. And if we can go on for methadone, what would be the process for that? Whether we should consider nerve block, or is there any other options? Thank you.
Okay, thank you very much, Dr. Beatty, for presenting this case. Unfortunately, I had to take a call in the beginning. So can we go back to the first slide of the case, really?
Yeah.
Yeah. So this is a young 12-year-old girl with pain. Next slide, please. So, and there is this huge mass which she presented with. Before coming to the discussion points, really, I mean, what kind of a pain or different pains we can expect such person to be having? Any comments, any thoughts? Is it only physical pain, or it's a psychosocial pain? Will there be a component of fear, anxiety? All those points we should keep in mind while we are doing the management for this person. Can we go on the management slide, please? Yeah. So she had had chemotherapy, and on palliative RT also was done, and she was put on a fentanyl high doses. So what does everybody think for a 12-year-old? 29 kg or something was the weight, right?
Yeah, 29.
Yeah. So is the dose of fentanyl adequate, proper? What are the comments, really? Anyone?
Madam, good evening.
Yes.
Dr. Bharat Paliwal here.
Yes, good evening.
Madam, I have two doubts. First, why she was kept on fentanyl patches when she can be safely managed on oral morphine? 12 years is a good age to take oral doses. And
Right.
second, there is no dose is high. The dose that is effectively treats pain is an appropriate dose. So we cannot say, as far as my knowledge is concerned, that any dose is high. A dose that manages pain well is an adequate dose. And
Right.
third thing
So,
is,
yeah.
sorry. And the
Yeah.
third is neuropathic components. If pain is persisting to trigeminal area category, we can try a gastrin ganglion block for the same.
Right. So
Thank you.
the presenters really, would you like to comment on why the fentanyl was started in this case?
Yeah, the child preferred to have the patches because she had to take 2 frequent doses of morphine. And in the initial stages, it was like she was having severe pain and trismus also. So better to avoid frequent oral doses, we had changed to fentanyl patch.
Okay. And was she any time earlier on morphine?
Yeah, started with morphine only. Once it
Yes,
was
I
to
could
around
see that. Yeah. So was it the exercise to do something like opioid rotation, we call it?
No, it was mainly for administrative, the ease of administration of drug only we have changed it to fentanyl. So for a
Okay.
child.
So I can see Savita here and Shobha. Sorry.
Can I put in a word?
Yeah, sure, sure.
Yeah, me and Betty are colleagues. In fact, we had treated her. Initially, I had put her on morphine only, and she was on a pretty high dose, but she was not comfortable with it. And at that time, as Betty had told, she had a lot of trismus and it was very difficult to take orally. And that was
Okay.
one of the reasons why we started fentanyl patch. We used a lot of fentanyl patch in our institute, and we did find really good. I mean, most of them were started on morphine as a form of rotation, or even otherwise. We did find fentanyl quite useful in many cases where they could afford it. In this case,
So, yeah, please go ahead.
the reason why we started on fentanyl. In
Mhm.
fact, in between, we had very good episodes of pain-free time when this combination was given, fentanyl with the neuropathic pain management with some steroids and all that. Unfortunately, her disease was continuing to progress and she was continuing to have therapies which are giving her added pain. And as you are mentioning about the psychosocial element will definitely be contributing also. There is one of the factors that was troubling us was she was a child. So we had to be very careful about the antidepressants or something which we were going to start. We were not very uh, happy about it. So in between, she did have pain control. And regarding the high dose, there was I mean, I also know that we can go on increasing the opioid, but unfortunately, when we are adding a cocktail of drugs, sometimes just increasing the opioid will only increase the opioid toxicity. We need to, it's a mix up of everything else that we are doing. So sometimes the fentanyl alone can make her a bit constipated. Come back to morphine, but again, the dose will be quite high and the practical difficulty of taking, and they are also used to fentanyl and they want to continue with that. That's why Dr. Betty was also discussing about the methadone possibility in this case, because it's
Right.
got an energy antagonism also. So it
So
helps.
yeah, thank you very much, sir. And I think we are going to have entire session and a discussion on methadone later on. So can we discuss here, like Seema, you mentioned about IV fentanyl. Would you like to elaborate it for the group, the role and the dose and how we start?
What are you fentanyl patch, please?
No,
So
no.
we
Dr. Seema was mentioning in the chat box about IV fentanyl. So, would you like to say something, Seema, about the dose, how you calculate and how you go on increasing the dose? Yeah, so she is writing in unstable pain, we start IV fentanyl. So, how do you start per kg body weight? What's the dose? Seema, would you like to type and let everyone know, like, how do you start IV fentanyl? No, patient is not on IV fentanyl, but because Dr. Seema put a question that we can start with IV fentanyl.
no, can I, sorry to interrupt again.
Sure.
Patient is a young girl
Hmm.
who looks like a fairy, comes walking and smiling and
Hmm.
complains of pain. Of course, the pain is there. We
Oh.
cannot, she's not for a situation where this got intractable pain that she requires admission with IV opioids. She has never been like that. Even I
Okay.
think maybe we were given as a bolus of IV morphine when she comes with severe pain in the OP, and then we again adjust the dose and she goes back home. So IV fentanyl, IV morphine we have given in our institute, but in her case, so far it was not required. Of course, we'd like to know more about it.
Yes. So Is anyone else giving IV fentanyl when patient comes in and maintain them? Seema, yeah,
One of
Seema is saying so she was not in pain crisis. No, I don't think so, Seema, according to the explanation given by doctor. So suppose if this patient comes in pain crisis, how would you like to start? Do you want to mention like how do you start IV fentanyl and how would you maintain? Savita, do you use IV fentanyl?
No, I don't use much IV
Yeah.
fentanyl, Priya, because I'm in a secondary level hospital, not seeing too many malignant cases. But I was
So
just having this question in my mind: what would be the optimum dose of gabapentin and
exactly.
paracetamol here? Have we optimized to the dose at step 1 and step 2 before going on to the step 3? Or is there a scope for increasing paracetamol and gabapentin? That is what I would like to go back to the literature and see. As far as I know, 50 mg per kg gabapentin can be used in children. But what is the maximum dose in palliative care patients? And I'm sure paracetamol we can increase. It seems to be not enough for a 12-year-old child.
Yeah, depends on the
50
weight
mg
and yeah.
Anna, we can increase that, I feel.
Yeah. Okay. So any other faculty here? Shobha is here, right? Shobha, would you want to add something? Dr. Shobha? Anne, would you like to have some comments?
Yes, thank you. What a wonderful case and another great session. A very difficult case for neuropathic pain. I had just a couple comments. I think this is a very good case for methadone, which will, and I understand Dr. Sunil and Dr. Theo will be doing that talk and how to convert. While I do believe that we need to treat the pain as we get to these doses, especially in a 29 kg patient, I just want us to be alert for opiate hyperalgesia. Sometimes we get into trouble continuing to escalate the opioids when really what we're dealing with is a toxicity. I'm not saying that that's happening in this case, but to be alert for that. So this is exactly the case that I would move to opiate rotation, which happily in India is possible now with methadone, and methadone is safe in children. So I just be cautious about continuing to escalate. I learned that the hard way in the 1990s. That's my biggest concern for her. And with her very small, as a 12-year-old, I'd be careful about more acetaminophen. I'm sorry, I don't know how to dose gabapentin in children, but that would certainly be helpful as well.
So, is there anyone who's working particularly in pediatric palliative care, and would they like to tell, because this girl is just 12 years, I guess. So, anyone who's working more in pediatric group and would want to comment about a dose of gabapentin here? I think as one of the participants suggested that if the pain is more and she is getting relief with this dose, even if it looks for 29 kg 12-year-old 300 milligram HS gabapentin as a slightly higher dose, if she needs it, maybe we will have to give it. But I would appreciate a comment. Biju, I can see you here. Biju, would you want to comment here? Biju Raghavan.
Comment about?
Comment about dose of gabapentin in 12-year-old.
No, I don't use gabapentin, and and not much experience with pediatric patients either.
Okay. Thank you, Biju. Priya, we have a comment here from Dr. Shobha. I think we are confusing Shobha is a participant and both of us are thinking it's our Shobha Nair who's the faculty.
Oh, so this is different one. Sorry. I
Yes,
thought
yes, yes.
And
okay.
please Shobha ma'am. Yeah.
Okay.
Okay. Okay. No issues. So,
Okay, ma'am.
Dr.
Okay.
Dr.
And how
Sri
about
Devi, sorry, Dr. Sri Devi, I can see her here. Would you like to comment on the medications and do we want to modify anything here?
I don't have much experience with gabapentin in children, definitely, and not much in adults also. But I guess metronidazole would be one thing which I would consider.
Sorry, your voice is not very clear, Sri Devi.
Oh, I'm sorry. I'll put it in the chat.
Okay.
we can try TENS also. We've probably not done that here.
Hello, am I audible?
Yes.
Yes, Seema.
Yeah. So I think for those above 12 years, gabapentin dose is similarly that we can give in those over 12 years of age. So around, I think up to 12, it is around, if I'm not mistaken, 20 to 30 milligrams per kg per day.
Dr. Seema, your voice is very low. Can you speak a little more louder?
If a patient is over 12 years, you can give around the adult dose, almost the adult dose can be given in those about 12 years of age. Up to 12 years of age, it is around 30 mg per kg per day, around that is what we give generally. And I think
Right.
I could, hello?
Yes.
Yeah. So the other thing was about the fentanyl you said, right?
Yes. Hello.
Hello? Yeah.
Yes.
So here also most important aspect is that so in here one of the important aspect that needs to be considered here also is the psychosocial aspect. A 12-year-old with a visible disfigurement with that is something that will have to be addressed. There'll be generally what happens in pediatric age group is we do not talk about children. But in such a case, like here the psychosocial component, how to live with that disfigurement, is something that needs to be addressed, and the child has to be helped to deal with that. That also can be a major contributor for this unrelieved pain that she's been reporting. So I think
Yeah, I think these are important suggestions, Seema. Sunil, would you like to have some comments here?
Uh, I think many are talking about IV fentanyl, and we have not answered that. So, IV fentanyl, we have to understand fentanyl has a shorter duration of action, and we sometimes give IV fentanyl titration for patients who has acute severe pain. So, we give 10 microgram every 3 to 5 minutes. After giving the fentanyl trial, we can calculate the total dose and then put it as a continuous IV infusion. And maybe later we can convert it into oral morphine or some equivalent doses of other strong opioids like methadone or morphine.
Dr. Priya, you're muted.
Can I just tell about IV fentanyl? Though I've not been using it here, when I was outside, we were using plenty of IV fentanyl. As Dr. Sunil had mentioned, I think the dose is 1:1. So if we are using 112 micrograms, here fentanyl 112 milligrams per hour is given as infusion. So, but I haven't used it here. But it is used. But IV morphine we use plenty for crisis, and it's quite useful and convenient for us. And then we switch over back to fentanyl or morphine.
Yeah, so thank you very much, Dr. Sunil, for highlighting the use of infusion of fentanyl, and I can see some comment saying that if the infusion has to be used, then I'll prefer using morphine infusion. So again, as Anne was mentioning, maybe you have to see the need for opioid rotation and which medicine is working better, and accordingly you have a choice of using infusions. In my practice, I have not really used IV infusion of fentanyl to many patients, because setting it in home setting becomes difficult sometimes. So you have to, overall see the situation and then decide on the best mode of medication to be given for best pain relief. So I think it is 8:28, and I would, if there are no more pressing questions, then I would like to summarize this session.
I want to come to have my
Sorry?
opinion.
So,
Sorry,
who?
Madam, Dr. Bharat Paliwal here.
Yeah.
One or two points. Although the team has very well managed the case and they tried their best to accommodate the, they had shortcomings in managing the case. But just I wanted to ask how the nutrition of the child was going on, because she was had at Christmas and she is not taking orally. This is concerning me, because if she can take orally, we can give oral morphine with the with the feed. We can time it. Second thing is IV fentanyl can be given if she comes in acute crisis, and simultaneously oral morphine can be given. So IV fentanyl will bridge up of 30 to 45 minutes gap that is required to take up the morphine onset of action, and subsequently it can be carried on. And third thing, in regarding the disfigurement, she is more worried about, since she is a child, she must be having some cartoon characters as his liking, so that his or her face mask can be used to cover up the area, so she can take care of the disfigurement. And fourth, because she may not be liking to put a rice tube for feeding, so a cartoon character face mask can be tried as a substitute for disfigurement. Thank you.
Bharat. Thank you very much, Dr. Bharat. I think I'll quickly summarize that Dr. Savita and Dr. Seema very aptly covered this such a big topic of pain management, right from telling us that it is an individualized pain experience and it needs to be holistically managed, considering physical, social, psychological and spiritual components of pain. uh, we went briefly through WHO ladder and equianalgesic doses of medications. We looked about breakthrough pain, incidental pain, uh, whether it is increased with coughing, and based on the case discussions, I think we realized there are times when we need to change the opioids or rotate the opioids when they suit need of adding for neuropathic pain, either gabapentin or amitriptyline as per the need. And again, having said that, and however many patients we have managed for pain relief, we have to understand that each one's pain is different and therefore each one's management is different. We have to spend enough time taking history of each pain. One person can have multiple pains and each needs to be addressed and treated separately. I think we have covered quite a lot during the case history as well. Thank you, Dr. Betty. And I think the biggest takeaway is, like, if the patient is in crisis, we can think about methadone, which is available now in India. We will learn more about it, and maybe IV fentanyl titration as we do IV morphine titration. I think that's all for this session today. Unless
Can I ask a
anyone,
doubt?
yeah,
Can I
sure.
ask a doubt? Like in this case, it was described that the child developed toxicity to morphine. Toxicity to morphine, as I have been taught, develops only when the dose is when there is no pain. When it is in an overdose stage, we have.
Sorry, I didn't get the question right.
No, the child developed, it was that the child developed toxicity to morphine. So as long as a morphine is, as long as there is a pain, the morphine was according to the scale of pain given accordingly. It was not overdosage of morphine. So how did the child develop toxicity?
There was no toxicity. There was
So
no toxicity.
No, even otherwise the child can develop toxicity. If the pain is poorly opioid responsive, then also the patient can develop toxicities. Or if the patient has some other things like renal failure, then also patient can develop toxicities.
So can you explain one?
No, some pains or many pains are not fully opioid sensitive. So if you give morphine for that patient or opioid for that patient may develop opioid toxicity such as delirium, drowsiness, or myoclonus. So it is not like you can give opioid for all the types of pain, and if pain is there, patient will not develop toxicities. It is not like that. If the patient has pain and it is poorly opioid responsive pain, then the patient can develop opioid toxicities.
Okay.
okay, and any last words before we close? Hello.
No, I'm sorry. What a lovely session, and I think it highlights that we have much to learn in the subsequent sessions with to learn how